And we should be live. And Victoria, you forgot to remind me to.
Oh, record. Please record, Quinn.
Yep, there we go.
Thankfully, you remembered, which is great.
All right, we
I'll check.
are
It's
we
coming.
are live. Go ahead.
Awesome. All right. As folks start tuning in here, welcome, welcome. We're going to have a really exciting AMA Ask Me Anything today that we'll get into introducing our guests in just a couple of minutes while folks chime in and log on here. But just to introduce myself, I'm Victoria Mitchell. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of goodparty.org. And we've been doing this AMA series with leaders in the democracy reform space going on a few months now, which have been really awesome conversations. I think, for folks who are plugged into what's going on with goodparty.org, there's just a whole world of amazing work happening all over the country that until you find out about it, we just don't even realize how far a reach and how many really awesome, great people who have the best interest of the country are really trying to change things for good at a systemic level, with the way our elections work and, all the type of work that really supports, what I know folks who are tuned into goodparty.org care about. In our case, it's changing the two-party system. Our guest today works more broadly than that on reform. But I think, in general, we, love to see these reforms take place so that we can, do things to make their elections more fair, more open, more transparent, less corrupt. All these things are, I think, important to anyone, regardless of their political affiliation. So today, as you're tuning in here, super excited to introduce Tim Dunn, who's the executive director of Unite New York. And we've got some great questions that folks submitted ahead of time for Tim that we're going to share. And we're also just going to hear about Tim's organization as well. So I'm excited to hear about the history, about the focus that they have this, with this election season. It's obviously a busy one all over the country. And so really excited to introduce Tim now. Tim, hey, welcome.
Hey, welcome. Thank you so much for having me on. Excited to be part of this and talk to the Good Party world.
Yes, awesome. Well, first, would just love to hear quickly about your background and definitely just introduce us to your organization and what you guys are up to in New York.
Absolutely. So I started out my career in government and politics right out of college. I studied political science in college, got an internship in the New York State Senate, and spent a couple of years working there after graduation. Was got a little antsy and wanted to go work on some campaigns and did so and found myself quickly back in Albany, working for then Governor Pataki, the longest tenured Republican governor in a pretty long time in New York State, as part of his third term team. And I did that for several years and really enjoyed the work. Knew that Governor Pataki was probably going to be moving on, and I didn't want to become a lobbyist. I didn't want to go to law school. I was still a pretty young guy, and I started working on my MBA on weekends. And I transitioned away from politics for a short time as I went into marketing and business development work in the economic development space. Got pulled back to the Albany region by a GE recruiter, where I worked for several years doing marketing communications, digital strategy, and employee communications. Left GE to run a small marketing agency in Albany, and then went out on my own in 2016. And I was running my own marketing consulting firm, and had someone reach out to me and say, "Hey, there's this guy that has this political reform organization, and he really needs some professional support services." And I came in and met the founder of Unite New York, Martin Babinick, who actually ran for Congress in 2016 as an independent candidate, and had started what was then called the Upstate Jobs Party, which was focused on two things very different than what we are now. One, it was trying to become a political party, trying to become a third party, and really focused on issues of economic development and workforce development and really economic enablement. We shifted gears in 2021 and really started focusing more and more on democracy reform. And And then, January 2021 really hit hard and caused us to make a very specific pivot and lean hard into the democracy reform space. We started down that path and started learning more and meeting with folks around the country. And everybody we talked to said the same thing. Yeah, this democracy reform stuff is great, but you're in New York. It's too expensive. It's too big. It's too blue. You're not gonna change anything. And fast forward a couple of years, and a lot of those folks who very, very, it was full of kindness that they told us those things, are now sitting up and saying, "Holy cow, you guys are advancing the ball of democracy reform in New York. You're actually picking up the mantle of reform. You're actually driving some of these things forward. You've got a real following, and you're really starting to make things happen." So we're very excited about the evolution, and that is my incredibly long-winded version of my background.
I love it. No, thank you. And it's interesting. You started in politics, you took a break, you came back in a new way.
Anytime I get out, they pull me back in.
They get pulled back in. I mean, I'm curious, what did pull you back in? What was there, like something in particular that you're like, I just can't say no to what, because you lived it once, and so why were you interested in doing it again and in a new way?
So I joke that working in the governor's office at a young age was sort of like pledging a fraternity. It's the most fun you never want to have again. But the reality is when I left GE and I went to run a marketing agency, even before I started my own agency, I really started having the pulls because at that point I had my second daughter. I have two daughters who are amazing. And I had stiff-armed politics for a long time. And I started to realize as my girls were growing up and becoming aware of the world around them that we owe it to our children and our grandchildren to try to make the world a better place, to try to have an impact where we can. And I want this world and this country and my town and my region to be someplace that my kids are proud of when they're grown. And so that's a pretty compelling pull. And I'd recommend that to anybody. It doesn't have to be on democracy reform, but find ways to try to make the world a better place. In whatever your path is, whether it's through baking cookies, fixing democracy, or fixing cars. Try to make the world a better place.
Yeah, no, and it's a huge way to be able to plug in because democracy touches every issue at the end of the day, right?
It
And
does.
so yeah, I'm curious, just to find out given the evolution of Unite New York and where you are today, focused on democracy reform, what's up for 2024? What's top of your priority list for this year?
So it's hard to believe that the year's half over with already, but
I know,
2024 was it really is. Although I'm happy for the summer to be coming. 2024 was a huge year for us. We really evolved as an organization.
2023, I'm assuming you mean last year? Was it good year?
2024 has been a big.
Wow, already half the year.
Yeah.
Love it. Okay, I got you.
We made a lot of big changes going into 2024. In 2023, we made the decision that we were no longer going to try to become a political party. We shifted away from that, and we've really now focused upon being a non-partisan, nonprofit vehicle for reform. So just recently, we received our 501c3 status. We've been operating as a C4. I came on officially as an employee. I had been a consultant previously. I came on as an employee in January. We hired our second employee in February, a fantastic statewide organizing director to help get more people into the boat and rowing. In January, we established an independent board of directors, folks from the private sector that understand this stuff and understand governance. And we really started looking at how we evolve and grow as a membership organization, and for the first time jumped in with both feet into actively advocating and lobbying at the state level, where we retained a lobbyist, we put our money where our mouth is, and we're out there working the halls of Albany with an aggressive legislative agenda. So that was a big year, and I'll throw a couple quick numbers at you. Since January, we're halfway through the year. We have seen a growth in our supporter network, people that are just paying attention, that they said, here's my email address or my contact information. I want to help you guys out. We've seen that grow by 50%. We've seen our volunteer base grow by nearly 200 new volunteers. We have seen our social media following grow by more than 10%. We've seen our paid membership grow by about a third. And that's the midpoint of the year. So the punchline here is that people are hungry for this reform in New York. They like what they're hearing, and they're really tired of the two-party system and looking for a real vehicle for their voices to be heard.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm curious too, how do you, given the roots of the organization was in establishing an alternative party and in Martin's, prior run for office for Congress as an independent, how have you made that transition to being now a 501c3 and nonpartisan? That seems, I assume your membership base is mostly probably of that, independent or alternative party kind of crowd, which is our crowd here too, so just curious how that journey is, going and
Well,
where it's
we
going
sort
now.
of take a Big Ten approach. We don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, a socialist. We're all New Yorkers, and we think New York is worth fighting for. So anybody that is willing to be involved and help us, in a productive manner, advance the ball, we say, hey, we've got room for you. New York is obviously a blue state, and when you're involved in politics, unfortunately, because of the toxicity of our system currently, the minute you say, hey, we like this idea, and there's people on one side of the aisle that like that, people automatically try to put you in a box. But I think if you look at a lot of the issues that we support, these are things that are, these are agnostic reforms.
Yeah, tell us about those two, like work that in here would be great.
Yeah. So our advocacy is really based around a simple premise. We think democracy is a good thing, which unfortunately in some circles is a controversial thing to say. We don't think it's controversial. And we think that since democracy is a good thing, it's not a giant leap to say more democracy is better. So we look at how can we, as New Yorkers, help to strengthen our democracy in New York. And this is based in the fundamental concept that people don't feel like their voice matters right now because the two parties have driven people so far apart, and everybody standing in the middle is left alone. So we want like-minded Republicans, Democrats, and independents to work together on 5 key issues. And we call this platform More Voices, More Choices. We think that we would be in a lot better place if we had more democracy, if we had the ability to have more candidates on the ballot. So make it easier for candidates to get on the ballot as an independent candidate in the state of New York. New York is currently the toughest large state in the country to get on the ballot as an independent candidate. You have to gather 45,000 signatures in 42 days to get on the ballot. And unless you're a Kennedy, that's an impossible task.
And I'm curious too, because in some states it's wild where it's like independents or alternative parties have to gather, twice as many signatures essentially than, if you were a Republican or Democrat. Is it that way in New York or?
Well, New York, we're the Empire State, so we like to do things bigger. It's actually 3 times the threshold of the major party candidates only have to get 15,000 signatures to get on the ballot for statewide office. Independent candidates have to get 45,000 signatures. It's absurd. And it's clearly.
I don't know how you feel about this, but I've seen this in places and I'm like, this is discrimination, literally.
Absolutely, 100%.
There's a legal route, which, I know we're trying to take other routes to get there than have to take that route. Obviously, we're trying to do democracy through democracy and make the democracy better. And I believe in doing that as much as we possibly can, but just calling a spade, it's like, that's discrimination,
And the thing that we find troubling is, a lot of people around the country look at New York and we're like, oh man, that's the progressive capital of the US. That when you look at our election law, we have some of the most regressive election laws. And so I'll tick these off here. Toughest large state to get on the ballot as an independent candidate. One of only 10 states with a completely closed primary process. We had primaries yesterday for state and federal offices in New York State. There were 44 contested primaries in the state of New York yesterday. The total combined average turnout in those 44 races was 15%.
Oh, that's for New York, brutal.
We are a state with 3.4 million unaffiliated voters who are now legally barred from being able to vote in those primary elections. That's un-American. It should not happen. And we look at those results yesterday. Less than about 500,000 votes were cast across these 44 races. And this includes, oh, by the way, a race in the Hudson Valley where $25 million was spent in this House race of George Latimer versus Jamal Bowman. $25 million. It's the most expensive House race in the history of the United States, most expensive House primary. And that 25 million got 31% turnout.
Wow.
It's absolutely absurd. So
and no independents, no unaffiliated voters.
No independents were able to vote.
No voice.
Exactly. And in many of those districts, you'll see that the winner of the primary, on either the Republican or the Democratic side, that's the winner of the general election. Good luck having a Republican win citywide in New York City. Good luck having a Democrat win, countywide in more rural counties and areas of the state. So we think we got to make it easier for candidates to get on the ballot. One, two, I mentioned the closed primary process. We think New York needs to open its primaries. This is actually something that the two parties could do today through a simple rule change in their own party infrastructure. Doesn't even require legislation. But we think, hey, if they're not going to do it, let's see legislative activity to do it. A simple one is term limits. About 2/3 of the states in the United States have term limits on their governor or other statewide offices. New York does not. New York had one governor who served for nearly 30 years. And we've seen recently that our elected officers statewide have this nasty habit of being dragged out of office either in handcuffs or with their head held in shame for some nefarious activities. Whether
I'm in Illinois, so I feel you on that one.
You live it, right? I mean, we've had two governors shamed out of office due to their inappropriate sexual activity. We've had comptrollers thrown in jail for misusing the pension fund for their own benefit. We've had attorney general thrown out of office for assault. We've had the leaders of both houses arrested for corruption. I mean, the list goes on and on. So we need term limits. We clearly, I like to jokingly say that politicians are like diapers. They should be changed often and for the same reason. So we should increase ballot access, make it easier for independent candidates to get on the ballot. We should open our primaries. We should have term limits in New York. New York is also one of only about 24 states that have no ability for citizens to initiate a ballot process.
I was going to bring that up because I was
no
curious.
Citizen ballot initiatives in New York. Interestingly, nearly every single action of a local government is subject to permissive referendum. If my local government wants to spend a couple $1 million to build a playground and I don't think they have the money, I can go circulate a petition and compel that local government to put that up for a vote. But important issues like gun rights or women's health or healthcare or the environment, none of these issues are really taking center stage. The issues that people actually care about aren't being addressed by our legislature, and that's incredibly frustrating. And the last one, which is of the big five that I'm pretty passionate about, is ranked choice voting. We've seen now all over the country, all over the world, really, ranked choice voting has been used worldwide for years and years and decades. We've seen it work in New York City to get a more moderate candidate elected. We saw in Alaska in 2022, one of the most remarkable things to see. The same populace, the same voters in the same election, who are generally right of center, voted in a conservative Republican, a moderate Republican, and a Democrat in the same election. That tells me they're actually voting for the candidate and the issues, not party. So we think that those five issues brought together could really enable more voices, more choices. And ultimately, if we had those in place, I think we would have a more representative democracy. Elected officials would be held accountable by voters. They wouldn't be able to just kowtow to party bosses and speak to the 15% of the party faithful that turn out in these primaries. They'd have to actually answer to you and me.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. I agree completely. And yeah, I have one last question on my end that I want to get to all these great questions that got submitted to, and we'll roll through those.
Yeah.
But given, I thought about that going into this conversation, I was like, New York is not a ballot initiative state. And for folks who don't know the lingo there, across the country, I don't have it off the top of my head how many, it's like 20 something think like 23 or
It's
24.
about half the states have it. Yeah.
About half the states have a way for the citizens to, vote on legislation that kind of overrides what the state legislature could do on their own. So when the state legislature won't act on an issue, won't be responsive to something, the citizens can get signatures, put it up for a vote across the entire state. And you see that more west of the Mississippi typically. That's where a lot of the states are. It's kind of a quote unquote newer form of democracy almost in those states. There you go, 26 states. Thank you,
There you
Quinn.
go.
A little over half. And states like New York and many on the East Coast especially don't have this option, for the citizens to go around the state legislature. And so I'm just curious, Tim, from your guys' from like a strategic angle, how do you approach that? Because it's a different set of challenges than the states that have ballot initiatives. They have their challenges too, but
Sure. Yeah, obviously, if we had the opportunity for ballot initiatives, we could be taking these issues up one at a time and bringing them right to the people. But we don't, and so that strategy is gated off. So we're fighting to get those implemented and asking the state legislature and trying to compel the state legislature to enact citizen ballot initiatives. We've actually did a lot of research on this and looked at states as different as Massachusetts and Colorado and California and you name it, across the political spectrum. And we actually have come up with a proposal that we think could make a heck of a lot of sense in New York. We don't have a legislative sponsor for it yet, but what we're proposing is on any issue that a citizen wants to initiate the process, if you go out and gather signatures from 1% of the voters that voted in the last gubernatorial election, in New York State, that would be 60,000 signatures. And we know already 45,000 signatures is pretty tough. But if we say you get 1% of the voters to say, we'd like to see this issue taken up, that would compel the legislature to take a vote on the issue. They don't have to enact it. They would have to take a vote on, do we want to advance this to the ballot to let the voters decide? Now, if you were to go and gather 2% of the signatures, you could completely override the legislature and push it to the general election. But I mean, talk about guardrails, right? I mean, we're saying, oh, dear legislature, please, in your infinite wisdom, put this on, decide whether we can put this on the ballot or not. You can still say no and not put it on the ballot. Then, God forbid, it gets put on the ballot and the citizens are able to decide. This could be done in a manner where you limit the number that are able to be done in a given year, or you could limit the subject matter. We've actually gotten a lot of interest from members of the legislature on this and members of the majority party in the legislature. And what I was really thrilled about is this is something that we're going to try to advance the next legislative session. The one legislator that really got the most excited about this was not a newly elected legislator. He wasn't a progressive or an ultra conservative. He was a standard bearer of his party, and I'll say a Democratic Party because that's the majority party. Someone who'd been in office for a long time, someone who's a well-respected, long-serving member. So when I see guys like that saying, yeah, this is a good idea, that gives me an awful lot of hope and excitement. But what we got to do now is we've got to get those guys ready to introduce that legislation and get our followers and our supporters and the grassroots advocates around the state to say, yeah, this is important. We want to do something about it.
Yeah, that's great. And I hope, in our work with goodparty.org over the years to come is, we, keep building traction with more wins, more candidates out there, even though New York makes it very difficult for independents clearly to get those signatures, our tools are here to help them do that more effectively and help them get there. And, hopefully in the places that it is possible in New York, we can get some more independent or alternative party candidates, through, because the more numbers that you get over time, the easier it's going to be to tip the scales on the resistance to giving the people a voice. Because, our independent, people powered, anti-corruption candidates are all that's like where we are very diverse politically and ideologically in what candidates are into and what their issues are. But that is the through line. It's like democracy matters. We gotta protect it. And
importantly, that's where the voting population is. That's where the most of our voters are, is in the middle. They don't care about your party. They care about their family and about their job and these issues. They'll they'll be supportive of these issues. We do a lot of polling on this, and I don't want to go too deep on that, but you actually can visit on our website and check out the Voter Empowerment Index, where we poll New Yorkers on a quarterly basis. And the number one issue that they think would fix our state government is term limits. It starts with term limits. And citizen ballot initiatives and open primaries are pretty close behind. So we could talk poll numbers later, but I want to get to the question.
Yeah, let's get into the
I gotta believe there's
questions.
some good ones out there.
Yeah, for sure. I think we might have covered this one a little bit already. Let me see. You literally did. Which of the reforms, this is from Emily, that you're supporting have seen the greatest support and enthusiasm for? So term limits, it sounds like, is number one on the list there.
It's interesting. Term limits seems to be more from our right-leaning supporters, but it is universally supported. I would say the level of excitement is higher on the right. Whereas ranked choice voting is growing and growing as the number one choice for our supporters on the left. But yeah, and I'll drop in the chat here a link to the Voter Empowerment Index. That is a great place to check out some more detailed information of some of our polling, so you can see where we get some of these ideas on some of these issues, because it's all crowdsourced. It's driven by the average people, the average voter.
Awesome. That's great. And then Sal said, "Hi, Tim. Thank you for your time. Few questions. How does Unite New York plan to educate and engage the public on complex reforms like ranked choice voting and citizen ballot initiatives to ensure widespread understanding and support? Are there specific strategies or educational campaigns that you have found effective in making these concepts more accessible to all New Yorkers?" And then Sal adds, "I like the push for citizen ballot initiatives. Any examples of other states where these initiatives have, led to significant legislative changes, and how does Unite New York plan to replicate that success?" So
I'm going to answer that last one first, because I think that's the easy, low-hanging fruit, and it won't sound like a sales commercial. Colorado is a great example of where things have been done well with citizen ballot initiatives. I feel like those they were implemented in Colorado with guardrails in a way that doesn't allow things to run amok. It doesn't allow there to be a million issues on the ballot. It's controlled, it's logical. And if you see some of the good things that have now come out of citizen ballot initiatives, and some of the reforms that have been enacted are really powerful in Colorado. So I would say that's a good example, but there are obviously many, many others. Colorado would probably be my top example. Onto the other issue, the how do we educate and excite people? It's really we have a sort of a two legs of our three-legged stool. We talk about growing our organization and empowering our membership, research and partnership, and advocacy. Those are really our big three legs of our stool. So those first two are where we're able to drive a lot of education and excitement. I'm not coming to you from our offices. I'm actually sitting in the public library in Bethlehem, New York, because I'm about to do one of these forums right after this, where we're meeting with average citizens to say, hey, come on out to the local public library and hear what we have to say about some of these important problems and solutions in our democracy. We also are going to where people are. I mentioned we hired a new organizing director at the beginning of this year. I tell people all the time, if there's a crowd in New York, you're going to find our guy David there, holding up signs, running around, meeting people.
David's great. I met him through, we ranked the vote previously, right? Yeah. So
he's fantastic. Yeah, he has been to he's been to events as widely different as Dingus Day in Buffalo, who those who are of Polish origin might know what that is. It's a Polish American cultural celebration of spring, to the Mermaid Festival in Brooklyn last weekend, to, obviously it's Pride Month, there's a lot of Pride festivals and Juneteenth celebrations we've been to. We were at the St. Patrick's Day Parade in Manhattan and Brooklyn, and wherever there is a crowd, we're going to show up. We were at March Madness, Ladies March Madness in Albany. And we're out there meeting people, engaging with them. But just as important as getting out on the ground and meeting with folks where they are, we're also really strategic in how we gain and grow partners and utilize those partners. So we're working with organizations at the national level, like Unite America and Veterans for All Voters. We're working at the state level with organizations like Let New York Vote and Common Cause. We're trying to leverage these relationships and plug in with these diverse audiences, because in many cases, the national organizations don't really have a New York State organization. They function on the national level. So we sort of serve as their local chapter. And then for some of the other organizations that are New York based, but have a really broad platform, we can sort of help them focus in on election reform issues. So it's all about people and partnerships.
Oh, that's great.
And I'm sorry, and I'll throw in there one other thought.
Yeah.
We've actually gotten really, really good at our digital communications as well, with digital strategy, digital advertising, promoted social media content. I would encourage anybody who works in the democracy reform space is get smart on these tools, because the way to the precision with which you can reach people that care about the stuff that you care about is phenomenal, and it's incredibly efficient.
Oh yeah, no, we're a huge fan of that stuff on our side for sure. Getting nerdy and all those tools. Curious if you want to add anything. You kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but RW Booth says, thanks for doing this AMA. Always excited to learn more about groups that are working across partisan lines. But my question is about how Unite New York works outside of them. How are you engaging and mobilizing the 3.4 million voters in New York who are not registered with either major party? And you spoke to the roots, obviously, of the organization being exactly there. So I'm just curious, like maybe it's tying the last question to this one a little bit of like, how are you speaking to that group of people about these reforms and what's resonating?
Well, it's actually that last point that I just made about some of our digital tools where we've gotten pretty savvy, and it's been very helpful because, if obviously the 3.4 million New Yorkers is a big number. That's actually more voters than are currently enrolled in the Republican, conservative, and working families parties combined. It's the second largest voting bloc in the state of New York after the Democratic Party. But, a lot of folks that fall in that under that umbrella don't want to join. They're actively avoiding associating with a political party. So it's really hard to engage with those folks. So we've actually gotten pretty good at matching up publicly available data through the voter rolls to see who's voting, right? Of those 3.4 million New Yorkers, we've actually identified just about 1 million of them that are unaffiliated voters, independent voters, but actually are engaged. They're voting. They're 4+4s. They're out there and they're paying attention. They're voting in every election. And so what we've now tried to do is match that up against different search variables and different digital tools that we have at our disposal, and search terms, and connecting directly with them to say, hey, we want to engage with you. Here are some places. We have a home for you, and we're going to work on this together. And we've seen a lot of success there. But I'll also say the other side of the coin is important as well. In the election in 2022 in New York State, we had only 2 candidates on the ballot for governor for only the second time in history. We had a primary where there were a whole bunch of candidates on both sides, abysmal turnout, 15% turnout, 14 and 15% turnout in the 2 primaries, but yet the 2 candidates that advanced had no mandate whatsoever. 2 pretty unpopular candidates. The election, however, was decided by 300,000 votes. In a state where Democrats outnumber Republicans way more than 2-1, it was decided by 300,000 votes. And I went on our statewide cable news network a week before the election, and they asked, Tim, what do independent voters want to see and hear in a candidate? And I said, and who are they going to vote for? And I said, I tell you what, here's what's going to happen. They're going to stay home on election day, because neither of these candidates want to talk about the issues that these voters care about. And so we continue to advocate and say, guys, you're going to lose votes if you don't speak to these candidates in the middle. That's why we do the voter empowerment index. These are what these voters care about. And if you don't talk to them, they're not going to vote for you. Election day, 2022, 2 million of those 3.4 million stayed home. So it hit the nail right on the head, right? We said there's about 1 million engaged. It was just over 1 million went out and voted. And the election was decided by 300,000 votes. Had either of those candidates even touched on any of these issues and spoke to these issues, they could have swayed that election one way or the other pretty significantly.
Yeah, well said. And what a huge example of that, right? That's wild in New York. And I'll go to the next question. Milan says, I'm interested in understanding how you're working to mobilize youth and young voters. This demographic is often challenging to engage and bring to the polls. yet they play a crucial role in spreading awareness and driving change. Would love to hear your perspective on this and learn more about the strategies you've implemented to address this issue in this group.
Great question. And I'll jokingly say, if anyone can figure out how to, get those eager youth voters that are so passionate and so quick to comment on issues, to get to the polling place on election day, they would be set for life, because I haven't seen a candidate mobilize the youth vote really in our life. I mean, it's been Barack Obama to some extent, and Bill Clinton really was the only true example of truly mobilizing the youth vote. But again, we're trying to reform democracy in New York. We like doing things that are hard. So that's an area where we're focused. We're working on building partnerships with a bunch of youth organizations. We've worked with Students for Liberty and Civics Unplugged that specifically work with young, engaged, civic-minded individuals. We are actively working on voter enrollment tactics in New York. In fact, this fall, we're going to be doing a big push on getting folks to register to vote. But we're also going to really be doing a significant Get Out the Vote campaign ourselves on a completely nonpartisan basis. We're going to be targeting young voters and saying, your voice matters. Don't you think things are screwed up? Don't you think you can make a difference? Get out and vote. So we're going to be doing a big push this fall in trying to mobilize those voters. We're going to be on college campuses this fall. We're going to be doing digital advertising. We're going to where they are. A lot of the events that I mentioned earlier are very youth centric. As you think about things that young voters care about, we're trying to be in those places. It's not easy. I wish I could say that we've got a magic wand that we've been able to wave at this, but it's really just going to be about diligence and trying to go where they are and encourage them that their voice matters. Because, our polling shows that 55% of New Yorkers think the state's on the wrong track. We got to do something about that. We've got to get those folks engaged.
Yeah, and I imagine for you, it's like, hey, get out and vote and learn about these reforms that are going to make your vote matter even more if we can get them rolling. Exactly. Let's see here. I see from CRB, can you give an example of a policy position your organization's been able to effectively organize around that led to change in the community? What's that looked like so far?
So the issue that we put front and center this year, I'm going to say there's two really. The issue that we put front and center this year as our number one priority was term limits, because that's what we heard from voters was what they thought was going to make the biggest difference. And there was a really interesting bill in the state legislature that we were supporting last year that our supporters loved, but it involved term limits for statewide and legislative offices. And as we went and shopped that to the legislature, no matter how many people we had show up with us, they said, listen, we're not ready to put term limits on ourselves. And some would say it directly, some not so directly. And so we actually went back to the sponsor and we said, listen, we could go bang our heads against the wall on this issue, but we think we can actually make progress on this issue if we started with just statewide offices. And in taking that pragmatic approach, we actually unlocked a few other things, which was really interesting. We got the sponsor to introduce standalone legislation to put term limits on statewide offices in February of this year. We were able to pick up 4 co-sponsors in just a couple months in the state assembly, which is significant. 4 majority co-sponsors in the state assembly. But by showing legislators that we listened to them and that we meant business, we had a bunch of people behind us, but we're not, throwing rocks at the wall. We want to work with you. We call ourselves pragmatic disruptors. We use that as an opportunity to show, hey, we're willing to take incremental change. And what was amazing is we then uncovered a lot of support for our ranked choice voting bill that we had supported. And we suddenly had supporters coming out of the woodwork for ranked choice voting that we hadn't really elevated as a major priority. By the end of the legislative session, we were really talking about both bills at once with legislators, because we knew our supporters really cared about both issues. But by showing that we were able to be responsive to the legislature when they said, we're concerned about doing this, we said, okay, let's walk before we run. And by building that trust with the legislature, even though it was a tough thing to say to some of our supporters, hey, we got to take a step back to take a step forward, we actually saw a ton of progress from it. So we were really excited about that. We actually, on the last couple of days of, we did two lobby events this year, one in May during a complete heat wave, and we were standing outside the assembly chamber. And we actually were trying to get a meeting with a different member to talk about term limits. And as we were standing out there, Assembly Member Cullis, who represents the Ithaca area, actually came and sought us out and said, "You're the guys, you're the term limit guys, right?" And we're like, yeah, well, that's us. And she's like, "I don't want to talk about term limits, but listen, I have a ranked choice voting bill, and I want to work with you guys on how do we align these resources and advance this bill." And I'm like, and she came out and started by saying, "I only have 5 minutes. I'm in a big hurry. I'm overbooked. I got to go." And 45 minutes later, we were still talking. So we're going to be meeting with her in a few weeks in a follow-up to really strategize where we go in the next legislative session. But showing that ability to be nimble and responsive and thoughtful, I think has made a huge impact for us.
Yes, that's awesome. You literally just answered the next question from Garrett, which was about, how to engage with office holders and get them to engage and not feel alienated and actually move the ball forward. So I'll move to the next question from Ryan, which says, in your strategy page, you mentioned that your organization will be looking to focus on advocating for legislative change. Do you think you'll be doing so by mobilizing voters under existing representatives or bolstering new candidates? What's the approach there?
So that's a great question. We actually, in our prior lives, I mentioned earlier, we're attempting to become a political party, a third party, and in that we actually endorsed candidates. We functioned differently at the time. We were actually operating through an independent expenditure committee and a 527 account. We didn't make that change and got away from endorsing candidates because we found, even though we were endorsing candidates from both parties, we would have a lot of people say, "Well, you endorse this person, so I won't talk to you." Or you endorse that person on the right, so I can't talk to you. You endorse this person on the left, so I can't talk to you. And we found it was so toxic when you got involved in the candidate business that we really stepped away from it. So what we're trying to do is work within the existing system and build grassroots support so that when we go to these legislators, we can say, "Hey, here are half a dozen people from your district that care about this issue. And they want to see this issue moved. They want to see you be a leader on this issue." And we do it, by directly coming and respectfully lobbying, but we also build digital tools to help people contact their legislators. If you go to our campaign site, morevoicesmorechoices.us, there's actually an action button there that in one click, it'll self-identify who your senator and assembly member are, if you're a New York State resident, and it will allow you to immediately send an email to them and say, "I want you to act on these issues." And we saw in this legislative session, more than 120 emails sent to legislators on these issues. That's huge. That's a really big impact.
Yep. More, just growing in that. And it's the second to last question I'll say is kind of along those lines too, of how New York differs, in the ways that you have to engage voters and drive change and what's effective, from Tadovic, that this is who asked the question. And if you believe there's a particular strategy that is generally effective regardless of location, beyond New York versus what works in New York. And that's the theme of this conversation. I mean, like we said, 26 states have ballot initiatives, but all the other ones don't. So, if you're not in New York and you're listening to this, flip a coin. Basically, you may have them or you may not. You can just Google, "Does my state have ballot initiatives?" and you'll see it. But I think, Tim, I'm curious your response on that of being in a non-ballot initiative state where you have to work very closely with the legislature. What do you think is the most effective tactic and what's helpful?
Well, one, it's got to start with the people. When we started out, we really did take a bit of a grass tops approach, and it really has to be rooted in the grassroots. People have to be on the street caring about this stuff. And the more we dig in directly with the community, the more of an impact we've seen. It's a lot easier to be able to go to a legislator with a whole bunch of their constituents than a professional lobbyist. I will say, one of the challenges in New York is it's such a big state That's not easy. That's not something that every organization can do. We're very fortunate in that we've had a very generous benefactor who has supported us and helped us get here. But we're going to need to diversify our funding long term, because we can't rely on that individual forever. But New York, because it's such a big state and an expensive state, doing those grassroots issues alone, getting out to the people alone is really hard. It's a big state. To get from Buffalo to New York City, you're talking 5, 6, 7 hours of travel. That's a long time. Getting around the state when you're not on the major interstates takes a long time. We currently have a robust staff of 2 people. I actually just hired a part-time organizer in New York City to augment our team. We have a fantastic team of volunteer leaders that are helping us and being our voices and our eyes and ears on the ground. But I make the joke that it's the same way you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. We have started, we've been able to establish enough of a brand that people pay attention to us. And now we're reaching in community by community, individual by individual, and saying, hey, wouldn't you like to join us and help us move the needle? And Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local. When you're able to bring that home to people and say, look, you do have a voice, you can make an impact, that really resonates well.
Awesome. Well, I think last question is perfect here from Mossy Tyler, and I'm going to expand the question. So Mossy Tyler was like, hey, how can people outside New York help? What are some of the challenges you face and how can we help you overcome them? And then I'll add, hey, if someone's watching this who's in New York, how can they help? How can they get tuned into the work? So I'm curious for you to answer both on what's next for folks who are interested to learn more.
So obviously, if you're in New York, we want you to get involved and be boots on the ground with us. But if you're not in New York, there's a very simple way to help. We have a 501c3 that allows for tax deductible contributions. That's the easiest and most direct way. You can send a donation and forget about us and never think about us ever again. However, if you have friends and family in New York, you have people that in New York, you have organizations that you have relationships with, and you say, hey, I don't live in New York, but my uncle is the commander of a local VFW post, and I bet he'd love to have you guys come in and talk. We'll do that. I will go to every public library, every community college, every firehouse, every VFW, every Legion in the state to tell our story, every chamber of commerce that will open the door to us. So I think those would be the big two is if you know people in New York and you can connect us, great. If you don't and you want to help, the easiest thing to do is to click that link right there. It'll take you to our C3 contribution page, and you're able to make a simple, secure online transaction that will be tax deductible and into our C3. If you want to get involved and help fund our political efforts, our C3 obviously is educational. If you want to get involved and really with our political efforts and funding our political efforts, I will share my email address here and we can talk further, and I'll find the right way to take that money off your hands happily. But here's my email, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that come through after the fact, or anybody wants to get involved outside of what we talked about.
Yeah, and I'll say it out loud too. I know Quinn's probably trying to drop these in the chat on the live streams out there, but it's uniteny.org is the main site, uniteny.org/donate to donate, and then Tim's email, tdunn, DUNN @uniteny.org. So all that's there for you. Tim, thank you so much. Thank you for your passion, for your long history working on these issues, and trying to bring this to the broader non-partisan space. Obviously we love your roots, right, supporting on the independent and against the two-party system, and Martin's history there, who you mentioned earlier, but really exciting because this work has to be broad-based and it's gonna benefit all of us at the end of the day. So thank you for coming, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Good Party has been so good to us over the years. We love what you guys are doing, what you're all about, and the tools that you're putting in people's hands and advancing the common cause. And I will say the great thing about the democracy reform movement is don't feel like if you're working with one organization that you're somehow taking away from another. As you can see, we are all movement generous here. We all try to help each other out wherever we can. I've done events like this with Rep Us, with Rank the Vote, with Veterans for All Voters, now with Good Party. We love doing this stuff. We love working with our partners, and can't thank you enough for having me on tonight.
Yes, thank you. And good luck with the library presentation. Have
Thank
fun,
you.
and hopefully you get some new supporters tonight. So it'll
Can't
be great.
wait.
Thank
Thanks
you,
so much, guys.
Tim. Have a good night. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.